All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland, the best in paranormal talk radio. I'm your host, Chauncey Hallworth. This is my co-host, Kara Kittrick.
Hello.
Kara, do you have any news for us today?
Yes, I do. So a North Carolina man spotted a Bigfoot recently while taking out his trash. The man, not the Bigfoot. He looked toward a nearby wooded area and observed a 6-foot-tall shaggy creature with, quote, the biggest feet he ever saw. He was later interviewed by the local cryptozoology and paranormal museum on video. It's worth a watch. He appears visibly uncomfortable with what he saw, perhaps even terrified. The sighting took place in Littleton. In more cryptid news, video evidence of Mothman surfaced last week in Phoenix, Arizona. A blurry humanoid shape with an ill-defined head and wings was spotted rotating slowly in the sky in one video. Another video, also from the same region, came out shortly thereafter. Although skeptics proposed that the objects were balloons, specifically Buzz Lightyear balloons, wind data would appear to contradict this, according to MoveOn, as the objects were moving against the wind. These sightings are far from conclusive evidence of anything, as they were shot from so far away. Moreover, the thing, whatever it was, didn't appear to be moving its limbs or wings. It was just floating. Although this is consistent with many winged humanoid sightings. These were investigated by MUFON and are still considered inconclusive. And finally, an analysis of the makeup of coronavirus published in the scientific journal Nature Medicine indicates that the novel coronavirus was very unlikely to have been created in a laboratory. Apparently, COVID-19's transmissibility is the result of a particular structure that conventional genomics would have predicted to make it less efficient at spreading, not more. Therefore, it's unlikely that human researchers would have tried to engineer this particular strain in this way. COVID-19 is 96% identical to a coronavirus found in bats in nature, apart from a mutation of its surface proteins. The original cause of this mutation is, of course, unknown, but could have occurred in nature. The analysis also concluded, strangely enough, that the virus did not originate in a fish market in Wuhan, as many believe, but likely developed much earlier than that. And finally, a grim milestone passed last week, as the U.S. now has more confirmed coronavirus cases than any other country on Earth, and also we have almost lost more people to the virus than to 9/11. Right-wing pundits, including Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch, Bill Mitchell of Your Voice America, and of course QAnon, have sprung into action in response to this milestone, accusing Anthony Fauci of being a deep state operative hell-bent on taking down the president. Your country thanks you, right-wing pundits. Back to you, Chauncey.
All right. It's good to see a Bigfoot sighting back in there. We've been so dominated with coronavirus and aliens and stuff like that. It's good to see.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to find non-coronavirus news these days, unfortunately.
Right. I wonder if Bigfoot is susceptible to coronavirus. Are we close enough genetically to make that happen, or?
Well, a lot of people, the guests we've had on have proposed that Bigfoot is some sort of alien-human hybrid, so
that was our most recent, yeah.
I think they would propose that, Bigfoot might have inherited extraterrestrial, resistance to disease, being highly advanced creatures.
While Bigfoot started, out here, Pacific Northwest, stuff like that, it seems like the bulk of the sightings have moved to the south or the north-south.
Yeah, I think, you could get that impression, but I think it's not necessarily there are more sightings here, but that news outlets in the South are much more likely to report on Bigfoot than up here. So I think that's the driving factor.
Well, for all you people out there,
still
here. For all you people out there insisting on getting your news from the BBC because you think it's more accurate, you might think about tuning in to the North Carolina local news.
Exactly. You will never get the straight scoop on Bigfoot listening to the BBC.
No. Although later tonight, that might not be the case, and we'll talk about why at the end of our news segment here. It's nice to see some more Mothman in there, too, although a little disappointing when you said it was Buzz Lightyear.
Well, people proposed it was Buzz Lightyear, but like I
But
said,
why
it doesn't.
specifically Buzz Light?
Well, because of the wings, right?
I see.
It could have been like the Buzz Lightyear jetpack situation.
Right.
That's why people sort of propose that, and I can see it, and in fact, I would just believe it, except for the wind thing. It's weird that it was like moving against the wind somehow, which I don't know. Maybe our wind data isn't perfect. Maybe it was just a balloon, but
who knows? To Point Pleasant and beyond.
Indeed, yeah. This was Phoenix, Arizona.
All right, yeah.
Way out
there. And then Corona, how are you holding up with this coronavirus being stuck in your house? It's kind of a natural state for you.
Yeah, I don't understand your question.
Yeah, it's kind of a natural state for me too, but I can see it in the people around me. My wife's starting to go a little batty. She wants out, but I don't know. It's good to know that it's unlikely that it was created by governments, but of course this is the government telling us that, so I don't think that's going to sway QAnon.
Okay, but it isn't the government telling us that. It's a nature term.
It's big money people, big money nature, big nature, man, big nature mags.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think these guys are paid that much.
We can trust them.
I understand you. If trustworthiness is determined based on the level of, if it has like an inverse relationship to the amount of money you make,
right,
then yes, we can trust them. Although by that logic, we're the most trustworthy people ever.
Well, let me preface what I'm going to say with I am no huge believer in governments, nor am I a huge believer in taking down every corporation that ever existed. But I do think it's a little weird that these people are automatically jumping to governments killing their own people. I personally, if I was going to go with anything, I would say, Disney Plus wanted to solidify their memberships or something like that. Netflix knew that they were dying, so they released it. I would totally lean towards corporations before I lean towards.
So you're more in the cyberpunk arena.
Yeah.
Proudly, you're more in the evil corpse. I mean, that's fair. I think corporations are evil by nature. I don't think corporations are very good at keeping secrets or doing things, with sort of a long-term plan.
Right.
So that's the only reason I don't believe that. I don't think that's really how they do things, nor do they need to. They just
but I think they're really good at manipulating crackpots. So.
Oh, true. Yeah. We wish we were as good at manipulating crackpots.
Working on it. Just fixing the format, making some better intro songs, and crackpots will be ours. And in Crackpot Fodder tonight, we have, we referenced it a little bit earlier, we have Andy McGrath talking about the beasts of Britain. This is going to be all about cryptids from the world's 6th largest island. So that's a little bit of a weird place for cryptids to be, a little landlocked little thing, but now they got the channel. So maybe there's a French Bigfoot coming through.
We don't think you're a crackpot, Andy. You're crackpot bait. It's a crucial distinction.
Yeah, that's what I meant with crackpot fodder.
No, I'm just clearing it up.
This is our offering to the crackpots. But no, I actually I really enjoy Andy and some really interesting.
You don't hear about British Bigfoot.
Yeah, deeper takes on stuff we already knew was going on. So I like it when we get to dive deep. You're listening to Radio Wasteland. Come on back. Welcome back to Radio Wasteland and our guest, Andy McGrath, all the way from late night England for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And tonight we're going to be talking to Andy about beasts of Britain. This topic, I think Carrie,
a new one for us.
It's a new one, and I think Carrie will very much agree that this one is tapping into two of my loves. One of which, of course, is cryptids, monsters, mysteries, and then the other is sort of the history of Britain, because with
we got Beast and we got Britain. So
well, I grew up reading
things.
King Arthur and battling worms and all sorts of that stuff, and
Sure.
I'm wondering how many parallels there are between these two things, but let's start out, Andy, by asking you, other than being geographically located in the heart of this, what really made you say, like, hey, I'm gonna dig into this here in Britain? What really made you say that?
Well, for me, I've been in love with cryptid creatures since I was a teenager, which is quite a long time ago now. And, the usual things, Nessie, Patty, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, all those things, Achillean Bimby. And I just started searching around in my own country to see if there was a bit more than just, the lake monster stories going on. I had an American friend actually quite a few years back, and he's kind of taunting me and saying, look, what have you guys got? You've got Nessie, and that's it. That's the whole bag. And I knew there was a bit more than that, but I didn't know there was so much more. And I started searching around, and I thought, maybe I'll turn this into a little TV series or a blog or something. And a friend who worked in TV advised I should make it into a book. And I just started writing it foolishly, thinking I'll just write a book then. And that's how I do most things. Just sort of jump in and get involved and hope that I can come out the other side with the product that I've been boasting about creating all the way through. Mm-hmm. And it did come out, and I've learned a few things since then. But Britain, if you come from a place like the United States, it seems like a small country, but it's only small comparatively. It's
Sure.
not.
Sure.
It's big if you're on foot, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, exactly. So
it is like the sixth largest island in the world, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. And there's so many different geographical regions of the country, and so many traditional races with their own history and culture as well, have these legends, these myths and legends of the different types of, some would say, mythical, folkloric, paranormal creatures that resemble, a lot of the time, animals. And I grew up in Wales, come from an Irish-English family, but I grew up in Wales. And that's one side of the Celtic point of view. Racially speaking, I've got the other side of the Celtic point of view, the Irish. And I live in England now, and there's so much difference within this island, and so much history as well that it tells you something about the people, but also something about how different cultures describe animals for which they have no zoological point of reference. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very interesting. A lot of folklore is like that sometimes, especially in its drawings. When you see the Welsh dragon, for instance, on our flag in Wales, it has those bat-like wings, which we know pterosaurs didn't have, and this big jaw with something that looks like a pointy nose, which could be a beak, 4 legs. Okay, that's a bit anatomically incorrect, but it has a diamond-shaped tail, a sail tail. As we know that many pterosaurs had this diamond-shaped tail, and where did they get that from? It seems like a very odd, and it appears on lots of dragon drawings throughout the country, wyverns and the like. Where did it come from? That's what interests me. This deep history that we have on the island, but also, more importantly, these modern reports of creatures that resemble the same ones as we described seeing in the past, or our ancestors described. So, yeah, around the house's answer, but it all fascinates me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, when I think of cryptids, you were right in saying that when I think of England, I think of, Loch Ness, and, I think of a few others around the world, the Yeti and stuff like that. But when I think of, that's what I'm getting at. When I think of most cryptids, I think of them coming from the United States now, or at least North America. Now, is that because of my location, or are there really more stories coming out of North America than other parts of the world?
No, I don't. I think there's more reporting coming out of North America than other parts of the world, and I think having some small experience now with American culture over the last few years, and most of my interviews having been on American podcasts, and also having contacted many other people in different locations, I think what I like about North America, the USA in particular, is its boldness. People, in general,
No, I get you.
Americans tend to be bold, not only in their how they place their passion, So I'm putting everything into this. I'm buying the equipment. I'm contacting all the witnesses. I'm telling everybody this is what I do. I research cryptids.
Right.
That's what I see a lot over there, and I'm making it, financially viable, a business. I'm selling T-shirts. I'm not feeling, well, I should be ashamed of that, that kind of thing, or merchandise. And I'm seeing that in the witnesses as well, that there are many witnesses who are more willing to say, I know what I saw, and I'm not gonna shy away from that, because that's the truth, and I'm gonna hold to it. I'm gonna stick to my guns. I think over here, in particular, perhaps in parts of Europe, apart from in the case of Nessie, which, there's like a badge of honor in seeing it for many people, the cryptids that we might have on the island, if you report seeing one, even our population of big cats that we've had since the mid-70s, if you report seeing that, you were strange. The locals, your friends, your colleagues might think you're a little bit out there, especially in light of some of the American scene. Now, they might associate you with a fringe element, or that part of the fringe that stands out to people who don't know about the genre most.
Right.
Right.
So they might associate with that. And that, a lot of witnesses that I've had over here said, I'll tell you what I saw, but I won't let you interview me on camera, or I won't let you interview me on a podcast, even with my name hidden. I don't want anybody to know that I've seen this, but I wanted to share it with you. That makes validation very difficult, because essentially then what you end up with in this country in particular is a couple of researchers that have a lot of sightings, especially things like the British Bigfoot, but very little verifiable reported evidence.
Sure, it ends up being like a hearsay anecdotal.
It's almost, you could say it's secondhand in a way, or it's thirdhand because you just have somebody's word for it. Now, your researchers, what your gut tells you sometimes when somebody's telling the truth, or when they're lying, or when there's some sort of mental affectation that's convincing them in that moment that what they're saying is the truth, but really something else is going on. We know that, and we can feel it, can't we? But some people are so good at it, and I've had this experience several times last year. I've discovered I've been lied to, where in fact the person was so convincing, it frightened me. That they could lie so well, so convincingly. And those are just the breaks, aren't they? Sometimes you get a great report from somebody who's just been brave enough to report what they've seen, and sometimes, for whatever reason, somebody needs that attention, and you're the vehicle for that. So it's interesting, but I'm going off point again, like I always do. Yes.
Well, I mean, our
North
interview
America,
on a radio show going off that's what we do.
Somebody accused me, and I know I don't sound like this person, but I'm aware more objectively now how when English people speak, they kind of stumble all over the conversation, backtrack, and stumble over the next bit as well. Because this weird halting way I have, especially of talking. I don't know why, but that's how I did. Anyway, the point you are making is, are there more reports in America than the rest of the world? And yes, but just because there's more reporting.
Right. It's interesting that you bring that up. I had a friend who would tell me that during the, as an American, I suffer from being an American, and that is thinking the entire world is just like us, and that is, we had the Cultural Revolution. Other people didn't have it quite in the same way that we did. And then also a friend of mine was telling me that during the American Revolution, that Benjamin Franklin told us that Europeans viewed us as being tobacco spitting braggarts, And then
I mean,
a friend of mine who lived in China for the past couple of years. Yeah, I guess so. Who lived in China for the past couple of years, asked his students what they thought of Americans, and they thought that we were all fat and had guns. And so
again,
so this
seems
brazen,
reasonable.
Well, no, but it illustrates that this brazenness that you're talking about getting the sighting out there, about jumping in feet first, that really makes sense and kind of rings true. Yeah.
For me, actually, and I've got a lot of experience with, I live in London, so I've got a lot of experience with lots of different people from around the world in their original state, not second and third generation, but as they come to the country.
Sure, yeah.
And I like it. It's very interesting. But actually, this American brazenness, to me, it translates as courage. And maybe I thought it was brazen when I first started experiencing more people from your country. Of course, it's very different throughout. I understand that. But, the various states. But now, to me, it's a kind of courage that I admire. And I see in it something that we're lacking. And, although we do have some aspects that I really appreciate too, I think this courage to really jump in and say, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing from now on until whenever it stops, is lacking here.
Yeah, because a stereotype Americans would have towards English people would be manners and reserved.
Yeah, although my wife always says that English people are pretend polite, and I think that's true.
Man, that's true of everybody, I think.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I experienced that in the US too, but there was a lot more genuine, orderly politeness as well. So when I first flew to the US in 2018, we were down. There was a big storm that year, I think, around August, September, and we were down. I had to stop off in Florida and get a flight back up to Portland. And the first flight that stopped in Florida, it was mostly British people. So, we got off in some sort of slightly orderly but disorderly manner. Nobody really waited for anybody else. And then I took an internal flight. And the first flight I got off, it was just Americans and me. And everybody on that plane got up in order and let the person in front of them get their bag and get off. And I was shocked. Like, what are these people doing? It's going to take us an hour to get off here. And, but that was also really impressive. And
I flew recently, and it is impressive. I was a little surprised.
Yeah.
Especially after a long, like I've flown to England, and especially after a flight like that, to see people not try to kill each other to get a breath of fresh air really gives me a little hope for humanity.
Yeah. But you guys, you guys were the polite, the Americans on my internal flights, and I took 10 internal flights while I was there. Almost everywhere but Philly, they were really, really, really polite. I know Boston as well, but those are the two places where I felt most at home. So I got off at Philly airport, I had to change. I went and saw these Philadelphia girls, I think, at the coffee shop, and I was some for the coffee, and they said, "What you say?" And I said, "Can I have a cappuccino or something, please?" And somebody said, "He talks funny," and gave me the cappuccino. And they were rude to everybody in the line, but it was the first place that actually made me feel at home.
That's funny.
I've lived in London, so I was like, oh, thank goodness I can relax for a second now, because these girls are just really rude, so I don't have to care. Everybody in Philly just does.
Funny.
That is just hilarious, and I guess shows you how different we can all be. So in the book, you kind of break up cryptids into categories like beasts of the water, the woods, the air. I really like that sort of breakup, so maybe let's run with that. Beasts of the water, of course we know Loch Ness, and but there are others. When I think of England, of course, I think of a lot of ocean water, but are we talking oceans, lakes, or the whole 9 yards?
Lakes and lochs, coast as well. I mean, there's lots of coastal sightings. They're not as frequent as sightings in Loch Ness, but there's a reason for that. 250 to 300,000 people a year go to Loch Ness.
Are looking,
and point their cameras at the water, and that's just a reason to have more sightings, really, I think. Apart from Loch Ness, on the Scottish side, there's Loch Morar, which is the next loch that has the most sightings. It's actually the deepest loch in Scotland, Loch Morar, although it's not as big as Loch Ness. And it has some fantastic sightings there. Now, you have to remember this Scotland is really, really underpopulated. Even Loch Ness being one of the busier areas of the Highlands. I think the most populated village around Loch Ness is Fort Augustus, which has 600 residents.
Oh, really?
So this is, it's next to nothing.
Right.
Really, next to nothing. 1.9% of Scotland's entire landmass has urban sprawl in it. So it's just an area with nobody living there. So Loch Morar, I'll just tell you about that first. It's 1,017 feet deep. It's unlike Loch Ness. It's not tainted with peaty stained brown water, so it's very clear. You can see quite far into the loch. The River Morar it stretches, I think it's 8 miles down to the sea. There is a little hydro dam in the way, but an amphibious animal could get around that. They do get seals in there from time to time. And there has been sightings there going back to about 1887.
When you say sightings, are you saying sightings of something similar to the Loch Ness Monster?
Almost exactly the same.
Really?
So just dealing with those Nessie type sightings.
Mm-hmm.
It's got it's a number of names as well, just like Nessie. It's got the plesiosaurid description. Sometimes it's said to have some humps, whale-like black or dark brown mottled skin, snake-like head, measuring somewhere between 20 to 40 feet long. There were some very interesting sightings I'll tell you about, mainly the very, very famous ones. So there was a factory boss, Alistair McKellig of Mallaig in Inverness. He was fishing with a group in a boat, and they saw Morag about 50 yards away, 3 humps moving through the water with the head underwater. They said they were left astounded, fearful about how close it had been to them. He then saw it was his daughter and some, some guests at a local hotel who saw the same thing from a greater distance. But they said a lot of people are embarrassed to describe in the area that they've seen anything in the loch. One of my favorite ones, actually, because there's a great sketch that goes with it, was from 1975 when 2 brothers, Charles and Donald Simpson, were driving towards Brack Arena. It's a small village there on a birdwatching expedition. They were driving along the Morar River as it leaves the loch, and that flows over a narrow ridge of gravel for a short distance, where it's just a couple of feet deep. It's about 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and they saw suddenly a 20-foot-long animal rise out of the water, about 40 feet from their car, lurch across the gravel bar and sink into the deeper waters of the loch. They said it had smooth brown skin like a drum. And they commented that it had very developed muscles on its powerful hindquarters, which were unmistakable as it hauled itself over the gravel bar. They didn't see any ears or eyes, but said there was something that looked like a trunk trailing along the back of the body, which could have been a tail, I guess. And there's a great watercolor painting of that. That was done under Donald's supervision by a neighbor. Now, there are many sightings in that area. Adrian Shine himself from the Loch Ness Exhibition Centre, who's been researching the Loch Ness Monster for 60 years. Loch Ness and Loch Morar were his 2 primary research locations. Now, for me, the best sighting in this area was by Robert Duff, a joiner from Edinburgh, because it's the clearest sighting. He saw it on the 8th of July 1969. He was fishing from a boat in Moby Bay on the southern shore. The water was no more than 16 feet deep and crystal clear, and he spotted a monster lizard lying motionless on the loch's white leaf-strewn bottom, looking up at him. He estimated it was 20 feet long, with a snake-like earless head, slit eyes, and a wide mouth. Body was grey-brown with rough skin, and 4 limbs with 3 toes visible on each front foot, plus a tail. He was so unnerved by the creature that he left the area immediately.
I don't blame him.
Yes. I mean, you're in 16 feet of water in a fishing boat. I mean, it can't be very, very solid. When you're on those lochs, and I've been on Loch Ness a few times, not so much the other lochs, the feeling of the depth beneath you is really, it really gets you, especially if it's a little dark, a little lonely. There's sometimes you can feel that depth of the water. I think Loch Ness is 750 feet deep at points. Loch Morar is 1,015 feet deep. And
unfortunately,
really,
I don't have anything in my mind. I don't have anything in my mind for comparison there, but I have heard that they are just insanely deep for what they are.
Really, really deep. I mean, it's basically if you were to sink and drown, you wouldn't be found for a very long time to come. I mean, if you sank properly here, 1 second. Grab this. For the emergency. So, yes, I mean, there are many, many tales of lake monsters and loch monsters. I'll give you something a little further away from Scotland, actually, just to give you a little clue. Now, there's a district in Cumbria in northern England called the Lake District. And one of the many lakes there is called Lake Windermere. And they have a creature called Beau Nessie, named obviously similarly after Nessie itself. Now, I really love this area. The lake really isn't as big or as deep. It might be 200, 300 feet deep in places, which is it's reasonable enough anyway.
But still 20 stories,
It's still 20 stories.
Hide a moderately sized, skyscraper down there.
See, but this is the thing. So you, Andrew, you're really, sorry. You're really, sorry. You're really pointing out the reality of the situation here. We think that's not really deep for a body of water. But, our last guy there in Moray, he saw it 16 feet of water. Right. Clearly doesn't need a skyscraper to hide. So this creature, there's been around 11 or 12 sightings, some of them photographed since 2006. Now, we're not really sure why suddenly. There are myths and legends, urban legends in all of the lakes in that area going back for quite a long time. There's not really a lot of modern sightings. It does have a river, the River Leven, that connects it to the sea. Again, there are some obstacles in the way, but seals get into that lake as well from time to time. So, there is a route. First seen in 2006 by a journalism lecturer, Steve Burnett. So a straight line of broken water with 3 humps, about 20 feet long. Then it was seen in 2007 by a photographer, Lyndon Adams, who I'm in touch with, and he took some great pictures from an overpass called Gummers How. And he was really affected by the experience. He even set up a website for years and years, researching the creature and the animal. A great picture of 3 or 4 humps in a row. You can find it online by Tom Pickles. He was kayaking. They have all these little boating adventure things there, kayaking with a group, company, sort of company adventure day out, and they saw a giant dark brown snake with humps measuring 3 car lengths. He said it was undulating, moved very, very fast past him and his colleague, and looked like an enormous snake. Seen again, and this time photographed by another journalist who was up to capture the changing of the seasons. And she set up a time-lapse camera next to the lake, went away for the day, and it was programmed to take a picture once every minute. So she set up the camera, and she went away and came back. Her name was Ellie Williams, I think. She was working for Autographer magazine. She looked at all of the different pictures and the changing of the seasons every minute throughout the day, and suddenly she sees this strange neck and head with a big arched hump sticking out of the water in the distance. She zooms in. It looks like a lake monster there on the camera. And she's got, it's once every minute, so it's not a hoax. There's no evidence of anybody arriving before and placing it there, or arriving afterwards and taking it away. It's just there on one of the frames, and it's gone. And it's a great picture. She was using a fantastic camera. I went there. I did a little sort of teaser trailer for Beasts of Britain with some friends there. We stayed there for a few days and did some sort of night drones over the lake. And it's interesting, but it's very touristy. Even the locals don't really know much about the monster. it's just, it's just a myth. It's just a rumor. So yes, there's lots of lake and sea monsters throughout the country. Okay, go on if you like, or we can move on to something else.
Well, yeah, let me throw in here that, the internet seems pretty convinced that the initial Loch Ness monster sighting that made Loch Ness famous in the media is one of the most famous hoaxes of all time. The internet is pretty convinced of this, yet there's all this other stuff that they don't seem to cover, know. So do you feel that the initial sighting was a hoax?
You mean the surgeon's photo?
Yeah.
Okay. It's strange, really. There seems to be a lot more holes in the story of the confession than the hoaxed picture itself. Now, I think it's very possible it could be hoaxed for several reasons. A lot of people are convinced it's an act of revenge by big game hunter Marmaduke Wetherell against the Daily Mail for exposing his footprint hoax. So he was sent up there to capture Nessie. He didn't. There was a lot of attention on him at that time and everybody else, and he just got a hippo foot ashtray, I think, and just made imprints around the loch and took pictures of it, and he was exposed. And I think it was his nephew, I think, is alleged to have been the one who was involved in making the submarine in Nessie with the head of an Apatosaurus on it. Now, there's something odd about those pictures, though. There's more than one. First, the picture that we know is a crop picture. So the original is actually taken from distance. And it still seems to be, they estimate between 1 and 4 feet out of the water. There's a dispute about that. Lots of experiments to say where it could have taken place and to measure the distance. Anyway, but there's pictures of the head in a different position, other pictures, and it's the same reel. It's the same from the same photo reel, and they've never really got much attention. So they could have created 2 different models and photographed them, but only used the first picture. That's more than possible. But there's the other thing as well about the Harley Street surgeon saying that he took that picture. Now, I ran a clinic on Harley Street here in London actually for 8 years, and a lot of big consultants and people whose reputations would suffer a lot from that kind of exposure. It seems to me, and I'm not trying to read too much into it, but it seems to me, knowing people in that position, that even today, to come back claiming you had a picture of a lake monster would be detrimental to your career prospects. People are trying to say that he was trying to hide the fact he had a mistress in Loch Ness, that he was there with her. But it seems a very elaborate hoax. How about I was somewhere else at a different conference? Just why make up this big monster story and then get your name in all of the papers in which your whereabouts are going to be examined very, very closely? That to me is a stretch. It's not logical, especially not for somebody like a surgeon who should have a logical mind. Obviously, people do stupid things. I know that. And I just don't buy it. Right. Again, I don't know if it's a fake or not, but I don't buy the hoax story.
I see. And then, we're not too far off from taking a break here, but I'll ask you this question, sticking on the beasts of the water until we take our break. I heard of some sighting I read some article, and the guy was saying that they had a sighting at Loch Ness of what was something more like a crab or slug thing crossing a road. Is this the gravel one that you referred to, or
no? This is the Spicer sighting, I think, from the 50s. I'm pulling into my memory. I don't have it in front of me. I think he and his wife were driving on a hazy summer afternoon, and when suddenly they saw a large creature, rounded, slug-like almost, that looked like it was carrying something in its mouth, or had a tail that was curled into its side, with something possibly in the mouth, crossing the road very quickly. There's been so much controversy about that. I often look at the the way people describe things, when you have no point of reference for what you're seeing in your mind, you reach into your mental library to pull out the closest thing. That's why, gorillas were the hairy man of the forest and all these different things, or demons or troll creatures, all the different apes and creatures that man didn't know about in his more superstitious past, religious and superstitious past. So you draw what you know best. It all kind of had like the head of a fox with the tail of an ass, and then you've got this composite creature that comes together that really looks nothing like what they saw.
It's all very Lovecraftian, like H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah.
Remember Quetzalcoatl when the Spanish came and they thought the ships were floating mountains, didn't they?
Yeah.
Because the Indians, because they didn't recognize what it was. Their mind just said mountain, floating mountain.
Huh. Yeah,
that's my take on that.
Especially
he said slug, but maybe it was just a big slimy creature.
Let's move on to beasts of the woods. Definitely, something that we all think about when we think of England. Of course, the inventor of high fantasy in the world, Tolkien, came from there, we think of a lot of that stuff when we think of England, So what are beasts of the woods? Where would you start with this?
I would start with the British Bigfoot, a highly contested and very, very inflammatory area of cryptozoology at the moment. I mean, it's I'm both intrigued by it and very invested in it, in the research about it. I was with a lot of the main people who were involved in the research, like Neil Young and Deborah Hatwell and all those other guys. It's, how can I put it? There's over 500 sightings reported. They're on. Deborah Hatwell has a great map. She's the founder of British Bigfoot Research. Her and Adam Bird. They've got a great map. She was a witness back in the 80s in a place called Salford near Manchester. And when I first heard about it, I was like, what? Like Bigfoot? How? This doesn't make sense. How could that get here? Well, of course, we used to have bears and wolves and all kinds of things. So how did they get here, right? Mm-hmm. And we were once connected to Europe through the Doggerland land bridge, which is an established fact now, with the sunken area between here and our European cousins. Now, it's very interesting. The sightings are compelling. One of the things that really stood out to me about them, and I'll give you some of them in a few moments, was that the witnesses normally didn't say Bigfoot, because that's not really a big phenomenon here. So they would say it was a man monkey, or like a giant orangutan on two legs, or it was almost like a caveman, but it was covered in hair. And that, to me, they passed the Bigfoot on the brain test, and they were just looking for somebody to talk to. And people like Deborah and Neil, in the early days of this, they were very instrumental in that, in reaching other witnesses and telling them, no, you're not a crazy person. You saw something as well. So I really respect that. So Deborah was really great. She shared a lot of the sightings with me. I got to meet a lot of witnesses and find some new witnesses too. So I'll just give you two of the sightings that are very compelling. And the first one is in an area near me called Box Hill. I've been there quite frequently. Now, I live just outside of London on the edge of Surrey, which is a county. Very green, lots of areas, AONBs, they call them, areas of natural beauty. Beautiful wildlife areas, not a big population. And in 2012, in Surrey, in the area called Box Hill, there's this nice big hill, and it crosses a river that has these beautiful little stepping stones on it, and then it ascends up a hill which has these. It's heavily wooded and has steps, big earthen steps that are hemmed in with wood. And the inclination is about 90 degrees. It's about 700 or 800 feet high, and people run up it. Crazy people.
Right.
Not me. I take a walk up it when I go there. But if I can, I try to get a car to the top and walk down. Anyway, so this was near the stepping stones, near the bottom of the stairs in 2012. Late evening, summer, so it was still light. And the witness was running up the steps leading to Box Hill on the North Downs in Surrey. Now, during the training session, she'd heard what she believed to be wood knocking. She didn't know what it was. She just heard knocks on wood. And she'd finished the training. She sat down to have an energy drink on the steps. And just to describe to you the way they move these steps, they're heavily wood and they kind of curve around down the hill. So there's lots of blind corners. And 25 minutes later, she's still sitting there and she hears footsteps coming down the hill, and thinking it was a dog walker or something like that, she just moved out of the way and expected somebody to pass her. Nobody did. Had an unsettled feeling, and then she could hear breathing, felt that she was being watched, and she turned around and looked over her right shoulder, stood 10 meters back behind her and up the steps to her right side. What she thought was a sort of ape. Brown in color, patches of grey all over it, very human face with a flat nose and a very wide jaw, kind of out of proportion to the size of the head. The head was domed at the top, which stood out to me. Stood on two legs, but appeared to slump forward slightly. Very thick built, of solid muscle. And she said actually that it was frightening, the strength of it, the build. She guessed the height was 6 foot plus, but she wasn't sure. It stood staring at her for about 30 seconds before turning around and walking off, still watching her. As it left, she could smell a stale farm animal type smell that lingered. Now, isn't that strange?
Yes.
That smell,
Yeah.
she didn't know about the smell, but she had the experience.
That's a
And
very
that to me-
classic Bigfoot sighting, just down to the details. That's very much like the type of Bigfoot sightings you get in the States and the Pacific Northwest. So that's interesting.
Domed head, everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and the smell.
Again, does she say, I saw a Bigfoot? No, I thought it was some sort of ape. She doesn't even know the word. Those sightings, they really stand out to me. We have a lot of sightings just like that. The word Bigfoot does not come into it at any point. Because again, it's not a big thing here.
Well, we're, in the story, we're seeing a lot of parallels to Bigfoot. But in these sighting stories, are there a lot of, is there anything that stands out as being uniquely different? Because let's say, there's a lot of people who think a lot of different things about what Bigfoot is, from anything from an animal to an interdimensional traveler. We just had a guest on talking about that. But is there anything that uniquely stands out as being separate of?
Obviously, the British Bigfoot is, much more reserved, prefers tea to coffee. But
Right.
but apart from that,
Takes milk with his tea.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So is it pretty much verbatim? It's always so similar.
I mean, the descriptions vary in the way that we talked about earlier, based upon the person's own mental comparative library of animals they can pick things out of. Generally speaking, they tend to be described as either upright chimpanzees, orangutans, cavemen, or large apes on 2 feet. It's kind of strange the way that occurs time and time again. The face, actually, in many cases, is described as being almost caveman-like. A lot of them say that. But with this very wide jutting jaw, and of course the hairiness is another aspect that seems to stick out. Now, there was a sighting actually that differs from that slightly. Now, one of the things that also I was going to say is it tends to be smaller than the American Sasquatch. The top height I've received from anybody is 8 feet, and even that I think was overblown because of shock. I think sometimes something that might seem 8 feet to your mind is maybe around, top of 6 or early 7 feet tall. So most of our sightings seem to be between about 5 and 8 feet at the top. No bigger. No bigger at all. Now, I'll just give you another one just to throw it out there. There's a great a great sighting that was actually made by a primate keeper of 37 years. And he worked at the very famous zoo here. I won't name the zoo, but he worked there for a long time. He was actually nearly beaten to death by a chimp, actually, in his time there, and was retired early because of it. And he and his brother, they used to love going to Scotland and wild camping, because it's not illegal to wild camp. You can just camp wherever you want. And
Sure.
they would take small arms and air guns and things and shoot rabbits and sort of live off the land a little bit for a week or so. So again, in 2012, he and his brother, they were up in a rural part of Scotland in a place called Abernethy Forest in Strathspey in the Scottish Highlands. Not really too far as the crow flies from Loch Ness, but part of the old Caledonian forest that used to go across the whole part of that country. They got up early to hunt, first light, and they made their way to the rabbit field, as they were calling it, to hunt and get some breakfast. As they got close to the tree line, they headed out off towards a huge blackberry bush that they'd noticed the night before, and he was being careful, but he kept his brother behind him because he had a very heavy footfall. And after a few steps, he can't hear his brother anymore, and he turns around and sees this astonished, shocked look on his face. His mouth is open, his eyes are, staring past him off to the blackberry bush. And he looks over, and what he sees there is a dark figure crouching down with his back to him, about 50 feet away. He said, crouched down. It seemed to be about 5'2". It looked like it was eating berries on a bush, and its shoulders were moving in that kind of way. It raises its head a little, obviously hears them, turns slightly towards them, and then tilts to one side as if listening. Then stands up and turns and looks at them. Now, he said it must have been 7 to 8 feet tall, covered in jet black hair all over its body, except for the upper chest and face. Skin was very dark, except for its bottom lip, which looked pink. Had a wide nose and large eyes, but its features reminded him of an older bonobo chimpanzee, but with a much flatter face, especially around the mouth, so less of a muzzle. It was going bald on top. Interesting detail. But to his eyes, he wasn't looking at some sort of man ape. He was looking at an ape, just one he'd never seen before. He said it was 4 feet across the shoulders, longer hair on the forearms and the chin, and he's never been so scared in his life. And this is the guy that was nearly beaten to death by a chimpanzee.
Yeah, that is exactly what I was thinking through this whole thing. To be beaten, almost beaten to death by a chimp, for one, is just absolutely. Well, they say that the equation for comedy is tragedy plus time. Yeah, so I guess I'm allowed to laugh a little bit. But, for this guy to have this experience after that is just hilariously tragic.
Yeah. Like he took a beating from the kid, essentially, and now the dad's going to get you. Right.
Right. Yeah, that's hilarious. That's totally funny.
But he was he became, I think he's kind of dropped off the radar a little bit now, but he became a researcher after that. And went on to meet other witnesses and take other great sightings because of his bold step to say, this is what I'm doing, which I think is very admirable. But I'm not sure what happened to him, but I think maybe the pressure from the zoological community was there to say, look, what are you talking about this Bigfoot thing for? You need to step back and be a professional again. And
he's retired. Give him a break.
Peer pressure. He had, as far as I remember, he had little contracts with certain channels as a consultant, herpetologist, primatologist, and,
Right.
I'm not sure. I'm just assuming that was the case. This is a tough genre to be in, even for those who believe in it. There's a lot of conflict. And
I often wonder if there's any slapback to my day job of anybody researching me online and finding out that this is how I spend my waking hours outside of working. But, But hopefully there's something to be an American, like you said, that they all have their own little weird hobbies and
I hope so.
You need to like mine too. I don't know.
Don't disappoint me. Hold you all bold now. It'll be that way. Look, the thing about generalizations, right, is they're all generally true, but not of the individual. And I know that enough. My wife is from a different country, and it's just nice to see the perspective. To go in, sometimes you go in with a foreign exemption. I always tell her she has a foreign exemption here in England because she's foreign. She's allowed to say what she thinks because nobody expects that she'll just talk and read between the lines.
Wow.
So she can reboot the computer and just say, actually, are you saying this? And they'll go, oh, no, I didn't really mean that. Sure, but they did, of course.
Do you mind my asking what country she's from?
Yeah, she's from Israel.
Israel.
So,
that is quite a different perspective.
It is. I mean, it's a fantastic country. Then that's a place to really change your mind about what your expectations are when you get there, because it's just not how you think it would be. Because we just see it, we've seen it on the TV all our lives, right? And then you get there and think, this isn't like what I saw at all.
Yeah, I'm really curious about there because it's such an old culture and such a new country. It's a weird combination of things, So before we run out of time, let's move on to beasts of the air. Kara has suspicions that some of these are going to go in the realm of flying serpents, but let's see what. Let's see what you bring into the table. When you think of beasts of the air, what's the first thing that you think? Here in North America, I think we think of thunderbirds probably as the first beast of the air.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Maybe Mothman, maybe some other sightings like that.
The Jersey Devil, that kind of thing.
What comes to you first?
Well, in the UK, the most famous beast of the air is the Owlman of Mornin. Or the Death Raptor, as it's nicknamed now. It's very interesting.
This sounds amazing.
I've seen a lot of comparisons between this and Mothman. So continue.
You know what? I think there are a lot of similarities between the presentation, at least some of the witness sketches. Now, the Owlman of Mornin was first reported in the 1970s. It comes from a place called Mornin, and it was first sighted in Mornin Old Church in Cornwall. Cornwall's in the far southwest of England. There's actually Cornwall's actually an old Celtic country that has its own language, which is almost extinct now. But it's a very old, very rural place full of lots of myths and folklore and history and things like that. And that seems to my mind, have an effect on the locals as well. But this was first seen by two children who were aged 9 and 12. They claimed to have seen a birdman hovering above the Tower of Mornin Old Church in Cornwall. The young girls were understood to have run away and reported it to the police. Whilst at the police station, they were taken to separate rooms to give their statements. And allegedly, and you can see the sketches online, sketched exactly the same creature. And they were holidaying in the area, and they and their families left shortly afterwards. Another sighting of this creature occurred when several witnesses saw a large man-like owl sitting on a large branch in a pine tree. They thought somebody was playing a prank on them until the creature flew off. Now, curiously, and this has happened a few times, apparently, they claimed to hear a crackling sound like static electricity as it was leaving. There have been other sightings over the years around the churchyard involving people usually seeing red lights floating over the church roof. The descriptions of the creature, it's 5 to 6 feet tall. It's a grey-brown owl with red glowing eyes, a wingspan 10 feet across, with pencil-like talons, and it's said to emit a screeching or a hissing noise.
And is the body humanoid or owloid?
It's upright.
Avianoid.
It's upright, but I don't. It could be humanoid, but I'm wondering if the upright nature of an owl anyway is led to that humanoid description, whereas in fact it was just large and upright. Mm-hmm. It's not really described very well. I've always wondered if it was an eagle owl or something, just a very, very large eagle owl seen by, I mean, they don't they're not from this country, but they are sighted here now and again, seen by very surprised people who weren't expecting to see that kind of creature. I don't know, but the red glowing eyes do present a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Where does glowing eyes really exist outside of the ocean?
Yeah, where do we have bioluminescent eyes, right? I mean, lots of cryptids reported with them. But then there's the possibility of lights that they
light refractive eyes.
Yes,
lots of animals have this, but
they have that where it appears to be more red color, right, than white.
Exactly. It is interesting though that these sightings are so similar again to the sightings of the Mothman in Mount Pleasant and in Chicago, so if there is a natural explanation, maybe it's something similar in both cases, but
specifically in
the
the
glowing
case
eyes are hard to explain.
Specifically in the case of Mothman, there seems to be so much paranormal to it that takes it half the time out of the realm of being a cryptid and into the realm of paranormal. In the case of the Owl Man, is there any associated paranormal activity, or is it mainly just cryptid style sightings?
No, I think the cryptid style sightings. The most paranormal aspect of the Owl Man, of course, is the collector of that sighting, and who was Tony Doc Shields. You may remember him as the Wizard of the West, the guy who thought he could conjure Nessie and even try to pass off a picture of Nessie head and neck, which is comically nicknamed the Muppet Nessie from the late 60s.
I have not heard of this, but I can tell you that is what I'm looking into tonight.
You should look up Tony Doc Shields. He was essentially a conjurer, a con man, who traveled around the country with his family, a performing family, doing a very weird show. And he's actually, very involved in many cryptozoological organizations here still, and even, I won't say who by, but even vaunted by the head of one of these big associations as a father-like figure, and his greatest influence. So it just goes to show sometimes where the authors of these things, these sightings become tradition and history, but I'm very interested in finding out where they came from sometimes, and how it's morphed into fact over time, without looking at the source. It couldn't very well be true. He was well known at that time for collecting lake monster stories, and he didn't so in Ireland very much, and other things. He was also allegedly somehow involved in the Morgar picture, which is one of the lake sea monsters spotted around Cornwall. So who knows? There's a lot tied up in that. There is another very interesting, different flying cryptid that was spotted in Kent in 1963 by 4 teenage friends walking home from a party in the county of Kent. Now, Kent is like a very flat, marshy, boggy area. There's forests and things, but it's in the southeast of England, not far from here, where I am with this, and just very flat and marshy and sparsely populated. So some friends were walking back from a party in the county of Kent, and they saw a mysterious flickering light descend into a nearby field in Sandling Park. It made its way into some trees at the edge of the park, and the 4 teens then noticed a rustling in the brush and were shocked when a figure emerged and waddled towards them. They described it as looking like a bipedal headless bat, completely black and around 5 feet tall, with big webbed feet and wings on its back. One of the witnesses was convinced that it didn't have a head.
That is freaky, and there's something about the boggy and swampiness of it that makes it all the more tantalizing to the imagination.
It's a spooky place to be at night, Kent. I've been out on the marshes and different places there at night, and it's little expeditions, and it's just unpleasant. You just feel exposed all the time.
Again, very similar. Mothman was often described as not having a visible head, just having the eyes on the torso. Many of the winged humanoid sightings in Chicago in the last few years have been described as being bat-like rather than bird-like. So again, that's very interesting, and that's a thing where it's like it's a little harder because if it's a bat-like, there are no bats of that size, whereas there are some very large birds.
Right.
So.
Yeah,
I have seen a flying fox though at the zoo, man, and that thing is freaky huge.
Okay, I don't know if you have flying foxes in Kent.
Well, we don't have them here either, but
exactly.
But I do know that even a flying fox that could appear to be 5 feet tall couldn't waddle towards you on its feet, upright.
Yeah, that's true.
Do that, so it excludes that now.
It doesn't fit. So,
yeah, I mean, these are sightings. They're classic. I've started to call it, I was calling cryptozoology for such a long time and searching for so much evidence. I've actually started to call it modern folklore because essentially I can't prove what people are telling me, and yet some of the sightings and some of the stories are so compelling, and so are the witnesses. And I think, well, so it's happened. It's modern, but it's still kind of folklore.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, like urban folklore, urban myth doesn't really do it justice because of folklore. I like the word. What about dragons and flying serpents and such?
Okay.
Dragons, of course.
Is that actually a thing in Britain? I thought I read about sort of serpent type UFO sightings in Britain. I don't know. I don't know if that's really a thing.
There was. I mean, there's lots of UFO lore here, but I actually don't know anything about that at all. I don't step into anything, any area that I don't think could possibly be an animal. So I sort of try to stick to that, which is a little restricted. But on the search for unknown animals side of things, that's where I am. There were sightings that appear to be of pterosaur-like creatures. One of the most recent ones was in 2017, and it was witnessed. There were 2 pterosaurs witnessed by a lady living in a rural area in Woodchurch, Shropshire, and she claimed she was first alerted to the presence of the creatures by a strange screech that sounded like nothing she'd ever heard before. And after hearing the screech, I can't look. She became aware that the sound was coming closer from across the way behind some trees. She was shocked to see 2 pterodactyls flying side by side. They passed the trees and flew off fast until she lost sight of them in a clearing between some woodland and houses. She describes them as being much bigger than the biggest heron she's ever seen, with large beaks, leathery wings, both grey in colour. A few days later, a 13-year-old son came running in from the garden claiming he'd witnessed a large bird with bat-like wings that made a strange screeching sound. When she showed him a picture of a pterosaur, he said, "Yes, that's what I saw." So that's one of the most recent, but there are many pterosaur-like sightings around the country. There's another place called the Ayr Valley in West Yorkshire, and there's a wooded area there known as the Devil's Punch Bowl. So in September 1982, interesting, they're both in September, these sightings actually. There was a chap there who saw a prehistoric-looking creature flying low and erratically on large bat-like wings. It was also witnessed by a resident of nearby Eldwick who described a grey creature with a pointed beak and short legs. And then, same year on the 15th of September, it was spotted again by a man walking his dog in a place called Pudsey. The witness, after hearing a loud scream followed by a low groan, feared a mugging was taking place and went to investigate. Yet the same sounds repeated again from a nearby rooftop, and looked up to see where they emanated from, only to see a tall, bat-winged, bird-like creature perched upon a neighbor's roof, towering over the chimney pots. He said it was making a screaming call with his beak open and a grunt with his beak closed. It launched itself from the roof, and its weight caused it to drop a little below the level of the roof, and then its slow wing beat carried it off into the darkness. And he thought it was about 8 feet across the wings.
Wow.
And they go on.
Awesomely terrifying. I can tell that we've barely scratched the surface here. We've covered, basically Nessie similar sightings, Bigfoot of Britain, but unfortunately, we're coming up here on the end, and man, I would love to have you on again so we can dig into some more of these. But
I'd love to. Next time, werewolves and black shooks and trolls, we'll do the whole thing.
Absolutely, yeah. We're going to schedule that immediately. But before we end here, I want to make sure.
Well, that's why people have got to read the book.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's the deal. Before we leave here, I want to make sure that the audience knows where they can get your hands on your book, Beasts of Britain by Andy McGrath, if you're searching for it. But where do you suggest they go to find this book?
Well, it's on Amazon. So it's on Amazon paperback at all platforms across the world. Kindle, unlimited reading, and also in the lender's library. So if you've got it and you're part of the lending scheme, you can lend it to a friend for free. Oh. Read it on unlimited for free. I've made it as cheap as possible, so I do want people to have it. It's not, it's not something that's going to make my career. So I want it to be as cheap as possible, so you can have it if you want it. The next one I'm working on will be coming out in the summer. Beasts of North America.
Uh-huh.
That will be the next title. I'm also, if the coronavirus relents and allows me, I will be coming to the US to do some conferences this year through the Corridor 13 agency. And that's Russell Accord from Expedition Bigfoot. That's his agency. So he should be bringing me across. As I say, if the virus relents and allows some of us to travel to your lovely country.
Well, let's hope it does. All right. So if you're searching for it, you've been listening to Andy McGrath here on Radio Wasteland. The book is called Beasts of Britain, Beast of Britain, and be sure to look it up. Once again, his name was Andy McGrath. Thank you, Andy, very much for being on the show. Man, I hope to have you on again because we barely got down the list. Mystery of big cats, trolls, werewolves, shucks. There are so many other things that we could hit, and I hope we get to hit them again.
Thank you both so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.